In today's video, we're going to start out by creating some gold bars in Blender, 1 kilo bars to be exact. But before we get started, let's take a look at this quick ad for my 3D terrain pack on Gumroad and fab.com, and then we'll get right back to the modeling. Now that we're back, let's go in here and go ahead and get started. First, as always, I'll get rid of my logo brand here. And in order to make this gold bar, the first thing I want to come in here and do is create a cube. Then go into edit mode, and then I'm going to scale it down. And what I'm essentially trying to make is a trapezoid. But I don't want it to be so rigid and so strict that it looks fake. In other words, I don't want it to look too perfect. So I'm scaling it down on Z. I'm going to bring it down here to the center point here. And then I'm just going to scale it up on Y to get that elongated look like you see in a 1 kilo bar. And then I'm going to grab these edges here in edge select mode. And essentially what I'm going to do is just going to bring them in through scaling on X. That gives us this trapezoid shape. And now I want to grab all of these edges and I'm going to put like a little bevel on them. Now what I want to do is I want to come in and clean up the geo. So I'm just going to kind of tie off these verts so I can get an all quad solution here because it's a very basic shape. I'm going to do this on both sides just to make sure it's consistent. I could have also just cut this thing in half and mirrored it, but no more work that it needs to do. There's just no real need of doing that. But you could have done that. It would have saved you a little bit of time, but in my case, not worth it. So I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. Since we opted to do this manually, this also teaches you guys good topology. Okay, so now we got both sides done. We've tied off both of these ends where it's all quad solution. And now what I want to do is I want to add in some loop cuts because I'm trying to add some geometric density to this model. That looks pretty good. So now I'm going to come in here on this axis here and add in some loop cuts as well. This is also going to help us constrain this basic shape so we don't have to do as much work with bevels and sub D. And I'm going to come here and do this side as well. Notice I'm using different values because I'm not trying to make it too dense. So now we essentially have modeled the bar with a good amount of density. So now what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to add in a plane. The plane essentially is going to operate as a ground plane for the scene. And I'm coming here in front ortho and I'm just making sure that my gold bar, my kilo bar here, isn't like cutting down into the plane. I'm just going to level it a little bit and then just kind of eyeballing it to look and see if it's hovering above it or not, because once we get everything in place, I just want it to look more realistic than not. And what I want to do to my ground plane here is I'm going to add a solidify modifier to it, give it a little bit of thickness. And now I'm going to come back here in front ortho again, look at it again, and see if that bar is hovering. And as you see, it is hovering a little bit. So I'm just going to nudge it down on Z. I'm going to zoom right in so I can get real close. But notice we've got it beveled on those corners. So I just want to make sure that bottom part of it is kind of nudged right up on the top of that ground plane. If it's not perfect, don't worry about it. If it's close enough, the shadows are going to hide the fact that it might be floating a little bit, which I think mine still is, but no big deal. So now I'm going to go into edge select mode, grab that edge, pull it up on Z with extrude, and now I'm beveling that that seam there and adding in some cuts and just make that round off, and that basically creating a backdrop. You could have done it however. This is just the way I chose to do it. Notice I'm still in Eevee. I'm kind of looking around at some Eevee settings here because I'm contemplating whether or not I want to render this out in Eevee or not. However, at the time of the recording of this video, I chose to do cycles because of my displacement that I end up using, which you'll see. Next, I'm coming in here in the shader tab because I'm going to tackle two different materials. The first one is going to be the stamp, which is going to be the embossed text showing that the strike hit the top of the bar. The second one's going to be the gold material itself. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create this material stamp, which is essentially going to be a secondary material. And then I'm working kind of backwards. So that top one there is going to be the gold. So instead of me actually creating one and naming it and all that, I'm going to go into Blender Kit, which is an add-on I use a lot for quick materials. And I'm going to go into materials. It's a little eyeball icon so I can see the materials. And then I'm going to do a filter for gold bar. That one looks pretty good. So I'm going to double click it, or you can drag it. And I'm going to pull this one down. Now, if you notice, nothing happened. The reason why nothing happens is because I initially made the material stamp material. Then I went back and made the gold material, but I never told Blender what faces should have that assigned to it. So that's why you didn't see anything. So next I'm coming here in the textures and I'm going in and I am selecting an image I made in Photoshop that essentially has an artwork I wanted that mimics the strike that you're going to see in the bar. This version that you're seeing was an older version and the text is very sharp. One thing to note when you're doing embossed text with this technique is you want to make sure that the text is has a Gaussian blur on it or around it, because it'll make the transition in Blender much smoother when you emboss it with the displacement. One other thing I want to bring note to is if you see I used a bump node, what I ended up doing is using a displacement mode to add real geometry. So in the recording of this video, I had a bump, but I went back in later and did displacement because it actually looked a lot better. And I got out of Eevee and went into cycles. Since you guys know how to do that, I just didn't see the need of showing all that. Now if you see, I go back into my materials, I'll select that gold material and I'll pull it in as that primary material. Now what I want to do is come in and add a displacement node in the shader tab for the material.stamp material. And now I'm going to add in an image texture, which is where I'm going to dump the stamp artwork in here. And since I've already loaded it, I'll just select it from the list. I need to also make sure that the color space is non-color, so it forces black and white. And I'm gonna tie in the mapping node and the UV node on the end. I'm gonna change it to extended. And I want to make sure that under the settings for that material, I want to make sure it's bump and displacement. Or you could just do displacement only. It uses a little bit less memory, but I don't really notice it on my machine so much. Now I'm changing it from Eevee, which Eevee does work, but I'm changing it to cycles. Because I just think cycles is going to give me a better result here using this particular technique. Now what I want to do is come in and I want to start selecting some faces in UV mode, because these are the faces that I'm going to select to apply that second material to. I know I said UV mode, I'm still in shading. Either way, you can still do it that way. So I'm selecting that second, I'm gonna hit assign. That is going to assign the properties of that material to that particular face selection. So now I come back in cycles render mode, and now you see some craziness just happen, which is normal. That is a displacement. So since we have dense geometry and we're using the displacement node, what I need to do now is come back and adjust the scale. So as you can see, now we have that strike effect on the top of the bar. Now, if you notice, it's embossed outwardly. The way you get around that is if you want to flip it, you bring in an invert color node, set the factor to 1, so that's all the way it's going to invert the color. So if it's black, it's going to make it white. If it's white, it's going to make it black. Now it has an etched look. And I'm looking at it in Eevee because Eevee is just a little bit faster in the preview. But now if we go to cycles, look at what we have. Now keep in note, for this video, what you're seeing on the screen right now has the old image where it wasn't blurred, so you can see how crunchy the edges look. This is why I'm highly suggesting to you guys, when you guys use this technique, make sure that your text has a Gaussian blur on it, because it'll make the transition very smooth and it won't look real crunchy on the edges. You'll see that the final version of this is fixed. I'm just kind of sizing everything down. I'm in UV editing mode. So my selection, I'm just adjusting that selection with the dimensions of the image that we're using to make that strike look. If that makes sense. Okay, so I'm just looking it over. I'm pretty happy with it. It's a fairly easy technique. Okay, come back out to render, layout mode. Yeah, looks pretty good. So we've got a ground plane, we've got a bar, but now what we need to do is focus on making a scene. So one thing I want to do is I want to do an Alt D or an Option D if you're on a Mac, and that basically creates an alias. It makes a data linked copy of your mesh selection. So in other words, the data is absolutely linked to the first thing you selected. So if I make a change to any of them, it'll propagate the changes across all of them. Whereas a duplicate, which is Shift D, doesn't do that. It just makes a new copy with its own data properties, if that makes sense. Now it might inherit materials and stuff, but materials across X number of objects is the same material. You can look at that as an alias material. But we're talking about the actual geometry of the meshes here. So I'm making aliases. That way, if I go in and make a change to that bar, like the geometry of it, if I put a cut in it or something like that, it'll propagate those changes across all 6 of these bars that you see on the screen. I think that's a good enough explanation of the difference between an alias mesh and a duplicated mesh. So basically, I created a little array of here, how you usually stack kilo bars. And I'm just kind of adjusting my camera here to something that I might like. For the video, I did one camera shot and did a render, which I'll show at the end of the video, which should be coming up pretty soon. And I did some after video renders that I'll show in here as well. You're pretty much done. I mean, this modeling is done. We've got the bar, we've got the material, we've got the strike effect with the text. And now we're just creating the scene up, and I'm just trying to find different materials that I want for that ground plane, which I ended up changing completely. But you're pretty much done. So if you like this sort of content, like and subscribe for more. Hit that notification bell so YouTube will notify you when I post a new video. I'm going to start trying to ramp these up pretty soon in fairly rapid succession. So stay tuned. I just had some things in my personal life I just changed, so I've been offline for about 2 weeks, but I'm back in the saddle now, so I'm about ready to start knocking some videos out for you guys. So look forward to seeing you guys join the new stuff. Take a look at some new things that are coming and enjoy this one, and feel free to go back in some of the older videos and look at those too. So we'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll end this video out with a little bit of music and some renders. See you soon. Take care.